Okay, hopefully this is working. Looks like we are up and running. Sweet, how's the audio? Sweet, how's the audio? Sweet, how's the audio? Good enough? Alright, I guess I'll share this link. Oh wait, how do I get the link? Shit. How do I get the link? Oh, here it is. Oh, so I could have made this unlisted and then just shared, whatever. Doesn't matter. I think ideally I would like this to be either privated or unlisted, but it doesn't really matter. Alright, time to share this. Oh, I have to change the background too. Yeah, that's fine. This is the first stream, so it's not gonna go perfectly. I really don't even expect anybody to show up. I'm kind of just doing this so that I don't have to make a video. Because videos take a long time for me to edit, so I'd rather just have, like, a stream of me doing what I'm doing for me to go back to later, or for other people to look at, I guess, if they're bored or something. This isn't even gonna really be, a, like a tutory kind of stream. Like, it's really just me going through something and, like, trying to learn more about it, but, like, in front of other people. So don't expect to get anything out of this, I guess is what I'm saying. Okay, so the purpose of the stream is digging deeper into, um, okay, I'm sorry, this thumbnail shit is, like, bothering me. Can I change the thumb? I can. Okay, hold on, I gotta do this first, because I'm not gonna be able to focus. Um, okay, here's what I'm gonna do. We're gonna get out of this. Can I get out of this? Can I just, like, this? Okay, we're just gonna open a new folder then. And actually, I'll make a new folder for streaming. And then we'll do... I really should have done this before the stream. um, Putting boot camp. Oh, this keyboard's gonna be really loud on here, isn't it? Sorry. There's nothing I can really do about that. We'll call this... Okay. There we go. Okay, so for a thumbnail, let's see, new file, call it, what do I want the thumbnail to be? I don't know. Well, this is we need an index.html anyway. So I'll do that and make a CSS file. Oh, okay, never mind. Okay, this is what we'll do. Just do something simple, I guess, like there. That'll be the thumbnail. Um, thumbnail one, I guess. There we go. Okay, anyway, time to actually do some coding. So anyway, the reason why I wanted to do this stream was because I was digging further into specificity last night, and initially, what I thought the extent of specificity was just uh element selectors, class selectors, uh ID selectors, and inline styling. But it's much, much more than that. I mean, like much, much more. So, I mean, that's still like correct. It's still in that order of like, if you have if you have an h1, or any like specified element right here, then that would be lower specificity than, say, if you had a class name like this. So, if you had a class in your HTML element and you set its class equal to this class name and say that the element was an h1, this would overwrite this h1 declaration here. And then the same goes for the ID. So if you have like some ID name, then this ID name will overwrite this class, and so on. So let's get the HTML body here first. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and link the style sheet real quick. So it should just be, there we go. And I don't care about title or anything right now. So here's where it gets tricky, right? So I'm gonna give an example of all of these first. And then I'll kind of explain where the water gets a little bit muddied. So if I make a h1 tag here, oops. Go ahead and give it a class of, I don't know, we'll just do heading. So I'm gonna modify the text colors. So we'll make the element selector be color red. The class name, which is heading, set that to blue. And we'll also give it an ID. And we'll just do shit. I don't know. What should I name the ID? It doesn't matter. I'll just do header tag. Header tag. Why not? So we'll call this header tag. This should probably be hyphenated, actually. So it'll still work in the order that we were shown before. The one thing that I was digging into was like what happens when you have like an element path defined. So if I did like instead of h1 I did like body h1. So this actually has higher specificity than just h1 by itself. And this also extends to like having class names within an element path or ID names within an element path and so on, and it just gets really, really confusing and it's a lot to keep up with. So I'll give an example with these first. This is like the classic setup here. And I'll just make this green, I guess. So the actual color should be green because ID is the highest specificity. So if I run this in browser, and I need to give this some kind of content first. Then, here, I'll try to do this side by side. So if I do this, there we go. Oh wait, that didn't do anything. There we go. Okay, so yeah, it'll be green because ID has the highest precedence. Now, going backwards, if I were to, here, let's get rid of these real quick. So another thing to note is that if you have two declarations that have the same precedence or the same specificity, like if I came down here and did like h1 again, but I set it to blue, then obviously the order will go in whatever was defined last in the document. So if I refresh this, then it'll be blue because blue was the last one that was defined. And it also has the same specificity, so it's kind of like a tiebreaker. But if you give this declaration some higher specificity, like if I said body h1, then this will immediately have higher precedence than this no matter where it is in the document. So it will not be like this automatically is now prioritized over this no matter what. So if I define this earlier in the CSS and I save this, it's still going to be blue when I refresh it because this now has higher specificity. And I actually was able to break it down into kind of a number system. So it's kind of like, in here, this is what I'll do. I'm going to go ahead and put this h1 into a div, just to showcase this even better. So if I said, like, if I just targeted the h1 like this would be the lowest specificity. If I target it like this, then it would be slightly higher. And if I went even like further and made it more specific and said something like body div h1, and then set that to color, we'll do purple. Then now this would have the highest specificity, and this will be purple when I refresh it. So that's kind of how it works. So like the longer or the more detailed the path, the higher specificity it has, but it also matters what selectors are in that path. So these are just element selectors, and element selectors have the lowest specificity. So if I also included class selectors in here, remember class selectors have a level higher specificity than element selectors. So that's where it starts to get a little bit confusing. So it can be represented in kind of like a number system or like a set of numbers, and the best way that I could think of modeling it is like this. So it's kind of like CSS has this ranking system, and it does so in groups of these 4 numbers. And so it's kind of like you have so it'll just be like 0, 0, 0, 0 by default. And so this h1 right here, this specificity would be like, and we'll rank this from the first element, or the first number in the set being the highest specificity, and the last number being the lowest specificity. So the lowest specificity let's get rid of this. In this case, would just be the h1, so I'd just put like a number 1 here. Now, the tricky thing is that it's kind of like you have this level, so this is like the first level of specificity. If I were to make a class, like dot class name, like this, then this dot class name would be, this is what its number ranking would look like, so this would be like 1 right here and a 0 right here, right? Because class name ranks 1 spot higher than element selectors. But depending on how many element selectors or class selectors you have in one declaration, there's kind of like a sub number. What's up, Isaiah? Thanks for joining the stream. I forgot this was public, so yeah. Random people are probably just gonna stop by. So there's kind of like a sub number. It's kind of hard to explain. I have to give an example of it. So this would be like 1-0. Or we'll do it this way to make it a little easier, I guess. We'll do 1-1. It really doesn't matter. This is just kind of an abstraction. So this 1 right here represents the initial level of specificity, and the initial level of specificity is that this is an element selector. So I'll try and like do it this way. So it's kind of like type of selector dash how many there are. And that's kind of the pattern. So we'll say that, actually, should I use numbers or letters for that? You know what, I'll use letters for that to make it a little easier. Yeah, I think I like that better. So A is, actually, we'll call this D. So it should look like something like A0, B0, C0, D0. So something like that. And I'll say that A is element selectors, B is, oh, sorry. Well, this would be like inline, I guess. We'll revise this as we go, but for now, this is the basic premise. B would be ID selectors. C would be class selectors. And D would be element selectors. So this example right here would be like A-1 because D-1. Because we're using an element selector, it's just one element selector, and that just one by itself. So D for element selector, and there's only one of them, so D1. If I were to be more specific and say something like div h1, and then give that a color of blue, right? Now this is more like, here, I'll actually just comment these directly above them. So this is like 0. Well, I guess we'll do it this way, yeah. A0, B0, C0, D1. So this would be like, we have no inline selector, or it's not really a selector, but there's no inline, like, stuff overriding the H1. There's no ID selectors, no class selectors, but there is, in this case, 2 element selectors. So I would change this from D-1 to D-2. And in the CSS, it essentially reads the... It would read, like, it would align all of these number sets together and then read them vertically, column by column. And it would determine whichever one has the first occurrence of the higher number from left to right. It would choose that declaration, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So, essentially, the CSS will look from top to bottom at the very far left of this number list, and it'll just look for a higher order of specificity. So, actually, yeah, these should be just zeroed out, because we don't have any of those other selectors in there. So this would just be 0. So in this case, it would say, okay, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, D, D, and then it would say, okay, this is D-1, but this is D-2. So D-2 is higher than D-1. So it would just compare the numbers, essentially. And yeah. So then it would choose this over this. Now, if I came down here and said something like, what did I have the class name set to again? So the class name for the H1 is heading. So if I said dot heading, then this would have a specificity level of 0, 0. This would be like C-1 and 0 over here. And this is C-1 because the way that I'm organizing this is like, from left to right, it's A, B, C, D. A being inline, B being ID, C being class selectors, and D being all. So this would be C1 because we have one class selector. If I were to be more specific and maybe add an element selector within this path here, like say I wanted to say body div and then dot heading. So if I said body div dot heading, then this would look like, let's see, we have 2 element selectors, so this would be D-2, and we have 1 class selector, so this would be C-1. So this would be higher specificity than if I just had the class name. So if I just did this, dot heading, I'm actually going to do it down here. So we'll set this color as pink, and we'll set this color as orange. Then I'll paste the specificity level chart here. So this has a class selector, one class selector, and no element selectors. So essentially, CSS would read this column by column and say like, okay, they both have one class selector, but this one has two element selectors, whereas this one has 0 element selectors. So this would take priority over this, even though this was defined later in the CSS. So if I run this code, the highest specificity declaration here would be this one right here. So the text should be orange. Yeah. And this just extends like all the way down. So I actually made a chart of listing like every single combination of specificity levels. So yeah, I'm just gonna write it out honestly. So I'll just do it from scratch. So the most complex scenario that we can have here is that we have a div with an ID, and I'll just call this level 2. And I'm just going to change this ID to level 1. And I think we can give the body an ID as well. Yeah, we'll just give everything an ID in a class. That's like the most complex scenario that you can have. So we'll call this level 3. Actually, it would make sense if this was level 1, and then this was level 2, and this was level 3. All this... We'll just give them class names that are appropriate to their element name. So this will be class, div class, and class h1 class. Okay. So, this would, do I want to keep those? No, those should be 0. Yeah, okay. Okay. So anyway, the most complex pathway to an element that we can have in this HTML right now is, well, I mean, technically we could say like, in the CSS we could declare HTML body div, but I'm just going to leave HTML out of it. So let's just focus on the body, because that's really all that matters. So the most complex kind of element selector path we can make to the H1 is body div H1. So this would be like a general way of doing it. So this would be lowest specificity, higher specificity, and highest specificity for just using element tags. So if we're just using the first level of specificity within this set of levels, then all of these would just be in the very last column. Right. So again, D-1 means that there's one element selector, D-2 means there's two element selectors, and so on. Right, okay. So now there's no other way that we can access this H1 using just element selectors, so now we have to start bringing in other types of selectors, and the next level up from element selector is class selector. So, let's see. So, the three classes I have are body class for the body tag, div class for the div tag, oh, excuse me, and h1 class for the h1 tag. So, the simplest thing that I could do to affect the h1 tag would be dot h1 class. Right. And this would have higher specificity over all of these because its specificity level would look like this. Right, so it has no element selectors, so this is set to 0 again, but it has one class selector, and the class selector, which is like an A level specificity, or sorry, that would be C level. C level specificity is higher than D level specificity. So this would be chosen over all of these other ones. So if I gave this a color of, well, I don't want to have to keep coming up with a different color, so maybe I'll fill that in later. Well, I guess I could, no, I could fill it in now. Yeah, because we're just gonna check what it looks like in the DevTools anyway, so it doesn't matter if we can't really distinguish between the colors. So I'll set this to yellow. Set this to, I don't know, cyan. So if I save this, and I refresh, and we go in the DevTools, and I hover over H1, you can actually see, like, how this is being sorted. So, the H1 should be the last, so at the bottom, which it is. So lowest specificity, this would be second from the bottom, this would be third from the bottom, and this would be at the very top. And that's exactly what we see here. Right. So now I can start including the lower level specificities, like the element selectors, because now I have at least one class selector in the mix, right? So it's like a different combination of selectors. So now I could say something like div dot h1 class. So now I'm combining element selectors with class selectors, right? So this is an element selector div, and I'm saying for every h1 class that is inside of every div element, do this. And the specificity chart would look like this. We would have one class selector, so C1, and then we would have one element selector, so this would be D1. Okay. And so again, it's the first instance where something, where the numbers in the columns, where the numbers in the columns are higher than the other declaration that it's being compared to. So if it was comparing this declaration to this declaration, then it would check vertically, okay, this is 0, 0, 0, 0, C1, C1. So again, the same thing, don't do anything, check for the next one. And then this says 0, D1. So this would take preference because this is a D1 and this is 0. So it's comparing like 1 is greater than 0. In fact, yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and add the rest of these letters in. I thought it would make it more confusing, but I think it's actually easier explained this way, or easier shown this way. Yeah, I like that better. So yeah, it says A0, B0, C0, D1, and D2. Oh, the number over here is greater than this number, so it will take this as precedence. And then it just kind of keeps going in that kind of flowchart. So the first occurrence from left to right of a number that's greater than the number that's being compared to that's what's going to take precedence. So in this case, just having this h1 class declared here is going to be less specific than having this div element combined with the class name. And again, we could be even more specific and say body div dot h1 class. I'm just gonna make these colors random. It's not really gonna matter one way or another. So for this one, it would look like A0, B0. Still only one class selector, but now there are two element selectors. And then we would have to introduce, so we have two element selectors and a class selector. So now we would have to change one of these. If we were going to go up a level of specificity with the elements that we're working with, we would have to do body and then include a class name for the div instead of just the div element itself. So the class name for the div is just div class. So if I said dot div class dot h1 class, right, it's the same path. So body div dot h1 class is the exact same path as body dot div class dot h1 class. The only difference is instead of calling out all the divs, I'm calling out specifically the div class, which I'm giving to all the divs. Or at least all the divs in this document, which is just this one right here. And so again, this chart would look like A0, B0. There's two class selectors this time, and only one element selector. So again, when it's checking this vertically, it would say, okay, we have a C1 here and a C2 here. We found a greater number for the bottom declaration, so we're going to prioritize that one over the top one. So and I'm just going to go ahead and refresh this and then inspect element, which it already is set on. So you can just kind of see that, like, you know, you can see the specificity order. So the order of specificity for the color in the DevTools, it should match up exactly to the order that we have it in here. So in terms of like when we're declaring it and what level of precedence it takes. So this one, and we're going from low in the code, we're going from lowest specificity to highest specificity. In the DevTools, it goes from it sorts it from highest to lowest. Highest being on top, lowest being on bottom. So this would be the highest specificity, which is right here. And then the second highest is right here. Colors are matching. So cyan, cyan, yellow, yellow, blue, blue, and the last one being red. And this is really important because, like, this was messing me up last night. Because I didn't know that having combinations of selectors changed, like, the specificity of it. So yeah. The next thing I could do to be more specific would be to, instead of using the body element, to use the class name that I've given the body element, which in this case is just body class. So if I say dot body class dot div class dot h1 class, then the chart would look like this. So this would be C3 for 3 classes, and this would be D0 because now we have no element selectors. Okay. So now we are only using class names here. So this is the highest specificity within our list so far. If we were going to go up another level, then we could do one of two things. We could add another class selector or element selector to this list, but since we're just going to keep it, we're just going to keep the maximum path up to like 3 selectors. So I don't want this to be, I don't want to add another selector and make it be like 4 long. So in order to keep it like 3 wide and give it a higher specificity, now we have to go up another level because we have all 3 of our elements are the same level now. So we have to go up a level, so we have to change one of them from a class selector to an ID selector. And since the ID selector is a new level of specificity, we only need to use one ID selector to take precedence over this declaration right here. So whatever the ID for the H1 is, which the ID is level 3, if I came down here and said level 3, then this would take precedence over everything that we've declared so far. Oops. Yeah, sure, lavender, why not? And then so the pattern just continues. So I don't think I really need to explain that much more here. So we have 0 class selectors, 0 element selectors, and 1 ID selector now. And then again, just for completeness, you know, we could do div level 3, body div level 3, and that would be B1, C0, D1, B1, C0, D2. It's kind of like you're counting up in base 3. Like if you're familiar with like counting in different base number systems, if you have a base 3 number system, you know, you go like 0, 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, and then it's like 2, 0, 2, 1. So if you're familiar with that kind of stuff, then that's kind of what we're doing here. So yeah. I don't know if that made any sense whatsoever. I don't think I'm good at explaining stuff. I'm really just trying to think out loud, and I don't know. I don't know if any of this is making any sense. I mean, it makes sense to me, but I don't know if it makes sense explained to someone else. But anyway. So we have 2 element selectors combined with an ID selector, so now we can go up 1 level in the specificity by changing one of these element selectors to a class selector, because a class selector is the next level up from a element selector. So I could say body, and then replace div with a class name instead, which I've named it div class, and then level 3. So this would be B1. Now we have 1 class and 1 element selector. And so again, you know, if we're reading this vertically, it's the first instance where a number on the bottom is greater than a number on the top. So it reads A0, A0, no greater number there. B1, B1, no greater number. C0 and C1. Now there is a greater number. It's right here, so this block here is going to take precedence over this block. And the next level up here would be changing body to a class selector. So do dot body class dot div class, and then the ID selector level 3 would look like this. We would have one element selector still, two class selectors, and 0 element selectors. Did I say that right? I don't know. You get the idea. And so just like we had two element selectors here before, and an ID selector right up here, and we have to change one of these element selectors to a class selector because that's one level up. Now we have to change one of these class selectors to an ID selector because that's one level up from a class selector. So now I could say dot body class, and then replace div class with the ID equivalent of that. So div class's ID is level 2. So I could say level 2, level 3. And this would look like A0, B2, because now we have two ID selectors and one class selector. And again, the only thing we could do here to make this go up a level is to turn the body class selector into an ID selector. So the ID for body is level 1. And this would be the highest that you could do in CSS. So the highest element selector, the highest specificity that you can have in CSS is with a chain of ID selectors. Because the inline styling, so the A0 here, the A represents inline styling. So that would be like if I came into the H1 tag and I said style equals color, and then whatever. That would be like having an A1 there. And that would just always be A1, because it's not like you can have multiple you can't have multiple style attributes. You can only have one style attribute. So there's either a style attribute there overriding everything else, or there's not. Yeah, that makes sense, I think. Now, the only other thing is, then we start having things like pseudo classes and conjunction class name selectors. And those are essentially, I'm gonna get rid of this actually. Well, I'll do pseudo classes first, since we kind of just did that. So actually, do I want to do pseudo classes first? I'll do pseudo classes later. Let's do conjunction class names first. So conjunction class names are if you have like, actually, let me see, because there's a difference between saying class 1 dot class 2 and class 1 space dot, or sorry, dot class 1 space dot class 2. And this should be a dot here as well. So there's actually a difference between these two declarations. Dot class 1 space dot class 2 means for all class 2s that are inside of any class 1s. So this is specifically targeting class 2, whereas I think this treats this whole thing as like one selector. Like it's saying class 1 and class 2. So this will only affect elements that have a class of class 1 and class 2. I'm pretty sure. I might actually have to test that. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what that is. Actually, let me open up my... because I had this written down. I think it was in specificity rules. We'll do this. Oh yeah, that's a cool tip too. I'll get into that in a second. Right. Oh, right, yeah. So if you have a selector and then immediately have a dot after it, it's basically saying to look for every block class or every div that has a class name of block. So if I were to come into code here and do like come down here and say div dot h1 class, or actually no, this sorry, we have to use div dot div class. So this is saying for every div that has class name div class, and the div in here has a class name of div class. So if we had another div below it, like this, then this div would not be affected by this rule right here. So if we said this and then did .h1 class, this specificity would be the same as this specificity. And the reason for that is because you just count the number of types of selectors that you have, right? So there's a element selector here, div. There's 2 class selectors here. So actually, sorry, I misspoke. It would be the same specificity as this, right? Because this has 1 element selector, so that would be D1, and it has 2 class selectors, so that would be C2. So it would be like, these 2 things would be on the exact same level of specificity. Can I put ellipses in here? Dang it. I put a comment here. I just want to get rid of that yellow line. Whatever, it doesn't matter. So yeah, if you had one of these over the other, then it would just take preference over whichever was defined later in the CSS. But essentially, if you want to know what what selector path has a higher specificity, just count the number of types of selectors, and then whichever one has the most of the highest type, like for example, the ID selector has precedence over class selectors and element selectors. So if you have a path that has more ID selectors than another path, then this path will take precedence. So that's kind of how that goes. Yeah, I think I explained that to... I mean, again, I don't know if that made any sense, but it makes sense to me. And that's really all this stream is kind of like sharing my thoughts about like my thoughts about this stuff could be completely wrong. This is just like the way that I am thinking about it. Um but yeah, so then there's stuff like pseudo classes and pseudo classes so let's give an example of a pseudo class. So we'll do hover since that's what we did in the uh one of the assignments. So that would be, let me just save this and then reload this real quick. Um Actually, do I want to give these colors? We'll skip that for now. I'm just gonna target the H1 and then give it a pseudo class. So H1 hover, and then we'll just give some properties here. So if I do color magenta for H1 hover, and I refresh this, it's not gonna change to magenta because this we don't have it's, let me see if how do I explain this? The specificity for hover is the same as just having the H1 selector, right? So doing H1 hover is getting immediately overwritten by something like this, div H1, which has a higher specific. So pseudo classes don't really have an effect on specificity, is I guess a short way of putting that. I'm pretty sure, at least I was kind of hesitant to say that because I thought that they actually did, but now that I think about it, I don't think that they do. And if I right click this, go to activate hover. Where's magenta? Oh, interesting. Okay, so it actually does. So H1 hover is not the same specificity as H1. It's actually higher than class selectors. Interesting. So you could add another number here in this array. You could say the order is element selector lowest, class selector, pseudo class, and then ID, and then inline styling. Interesting. So if I add another element, so if I say div h1 hover, then this should this magenta color should be above this purple color. Right? Because they'll both have two element selectors, but then one will have a pseudo class selector and the other will have a regular class selector. And apparently the pseudo class selector takes precedence over class selectors. So if I save this and reload it and check that, then the magenta is above the purple. Interesting. So that's, I did not know that. So that means if I combine just one ID selector with this pseudo class, it should take precedence over all of these colors. So if I do, if I change this to H1 class hover, and I do, instead of div, I do the class name for div, or I'm sorry, the I class name? Class name or ID? I only have to do class. Or actually, no. This will just take yeah, this will just take precedence over everything alone. Right? Because we have an ID of class here, an ID mixed with a pseudo class. And a pseudo class takes precedence over regular classes, and we only have regular classes here. So if I save this, then this should turn magenta when I hover over it. Oh shit, it doesn't. Dang. Really? Hmm. Hmm. H1 class hover. Okay, well, where is it in the list? Oh, it's not even on the list. Is this not a valid thing to do? Wait, can you not use pseudo classes with IDs? Oh my god, I'm stupid. Never mind. H1 class is the class name. Level 3 is the ID. Never mind, I'm stupid. Okay, so if I save this, then it should be magenta when I hover over it. Cool, okay. Okay, so I was right. I was right. So if I right-click this, inspect, check hover, then yeah. This takes the highest precedence out of everything here. Cool. So really, this should be A equals inline, B equals ID selectors, then we should have like C equals pseudo class selectors, D is class selectors, and E would be element selectors. And now I have to change that for all of these. Oh my gosh. Um, yeah. Yeah, I'm just gonna have to change all of the, like, add one for all these and then change the letter. And then this would be DE. Oh my gosh. DE. There. Yeah, I'm happy with that. And I think that's it. There are... Yeah, I don't think there's any other... Are there any other, like, types of selectors. I don't think there are. Um, there was that media thing that we were doing, which that probably takes precedence. Actually, let me look it up real quick. Was it at media? Yeah. So yeah, so I don't know what specificity. I'm assuming that they would have higher specificity because it's kind of like an overwrite. Change the background color of body element to light blue when the browser window is 600 wide or less. Yeah, it's not really a selector though. Yeah, I wouldn't count that in the specificity rules. I mean, technically it would be in specificity rules, but it's not a different kind of selector. It's like a conditional block. Like if this, then overwrite all of the other CSS properties with these new properties. So if I did, okay, I'm just gonna copy and paste this. Yeah, only screen and width. Okay. So how wide is this body? Okay, so if I do this, yeah. Now if I come down here, and let's say that I really specify I'm pretty sure you can do this. Or sorry, this would be the ID for the body, and the ID for the body is level 1. We'll just do 1 for now. So level 1. Background color red. Oh, interesting. What if I target it by class? Huh. Really? Target it by element? Wow, okay. Oh, of course, of course. It's gonna match the specificity of the element in here with the specificity of the element outside of it. So if I'm more specific than an element selector, like if I use a class selector like dot body class, then class selectors take more precedence over element selectors. So if I made this more specific, or if I called this body class, then when I do this, it should work. Yeah. So if you really want, okay, that's actually pretty cool. I like that. I like that. That means that you can make it so that not necessarily every element within this block, within this conditional block here, will be affected or overwritten when that condition is met. Only the ones in here that have a higher specificity than the ones outside of it. Okay, cool. Cool. Yeah, I think that's all the... Actually, no, there is one more. So say, for example, that I wanted the background color to change when I hover over um, this text. So if I say... So I set the body's background to red. Um, then in order to target the body when I hover over the H1, I have to do hover plus dot body class. Oh, background color. Really? Plus body? Huh. So highest specificity is lavender for H1. Or maybe it's body that I should be inspecting? Body class is red. Yeah, I don't really know where to check that. I was under the impression that... Wait, did I write that down? Oh, wait. I think that was in my other folder. Pseudo elements. Oh, wait. Pseudo classes. Sorry. Yeah. The plus operator means affect the following element. So plus div. Pretty sure if I open this in browser, then this is what it does. Um, if I change this from div to the class name, like, if I said product one, yeah, then it just does it for product one. So yeah, that should work. I could even do this. I could say div dot product one, I think. Yeah. If I change it to products two, then when I hover over the H1, either of the H1s in the section, then it will only show the div with the products too. Oh, really? Section H1 hover div products 2. Really? Hmm. Okay, well, anyway, I think I'll end the stream there. I'll do a separate stream for stuff like for playing around with pseudo classes. But yeah, I think I'm just gonna end the stream now. So if anybody is watching or was watching, I hope you got something out of this. I really I really didn't do as good of a job as explaining as I wanted to, but I don't know. It's early and I'm still really tired, so well, it's early for me. So, but anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next stream.